Okay, I'm going to open up this live stream with showing my Patreon as usual. It's going to be in the chat. It's also in the bottom of the description. And if you go to the page, you'll see a little bit about why I'm asking for the donations. And I appreciate every donation that anybody gives. It goes from $1 to $100. 50 and 100 will have the future giveaways of a gold Roman coin silver Roman coin and gold Byzantine coin, respectively. And now on to the actual chat, or now onto the actual live stream with this. We will have, we're going to be going on the idea of the 12 appropriation bills and what is necessary. I might go on to go a little more in depth on this on my podcast today, to kind of go into a little more in depth of what the actual issues are. I don't know if I'm going to actually break it down by specific one and start making an actual series. I think that would be kind of pointless, because I don't think people would be as interested in that as people would on a specific thing of each of the amendments of the Constitution, each of the sections of the Constitution, as they would have been on that, because it kind of ranks as being quite burdensome on those issues. But we had the first one being agriculture, rural development, Food and Drug Administration related agencies, which oversees the funding for USDA, except for Forest Services and other agencies. Basically, when it comes down to this, I think we can actually make the decision that this is virtually useless, and this could pretty much be cut out, because we're talking that every bit of this could actually be done by actual private enterprise. When we're talking about rural development, most of that is we're talking that's pretty much functioning the same idea as what HUD functions under, and HUD is under, let's see where that goes under. That goes under, I just saw that. I saw where that was. Transportation, Housing and Urban Development, and related agencies. So that would essentially take care of most of what that would be doing anyway, with most of the benefits. So really, when we're talking about this is a lot of crony capitalism to agricultural subsidies. Now, these subsidies essentially are basically giving to farmers that have a lot of money. It's also essentially giving loans to tobacco farmers. Now, if all they had to do was release the actual regulations on tobacco, and the actual banks would actually loan them the money for their farms anyway. So that could essentially, all they would have to do is do that, and it would actually become a viable business for those banks. But the problem being is, because there's so much red tape, that they've locked it into where the only way that they can get loans is through the actual government, which makes the government on board, even though they actually pay back their loans readily, because it's a very, very profitable business. That's where it comes from. And basically where these things are at is, that's where we're looking at the FDA with it. That's basically, and the USDA, those are basically the FDA is basically gets in the middle of what would be normal testing now. What people go, well, we don't have the FDA. What's going to happen? Well, just like in electronics, we have the Underwriters Laboratories, which is a third-party testing group, and a lot of people prefer their equipment run under that third-party testing group, and that's a very, very important thing. And when we're looking at that, that would be what would be the case. And that's basically what would happen there. So really, when we see that bill right there, that top bill right, and then the rest of it goes to food stamps, which could essentially be directly replaced with individual charity. So we see right there, all that stuff right there could essentially be eliminated. That's one bill right there. Commerce, justice, science, and related agencies. The only thing that needs actual funding out of that, this says it funds Department of Commerce, Department of Justice, NASA, and other agencies. The only thing that actually needs funding is the Department of Justice. That's it. Department of Justice is actually a constitutional department. Everything else is basically does not need one bit of funding because it's completely illegitimate. Department of Commerce is basically is not necessary anymore, because the only thing that's it basically does is it doesn't even function on a level that's necessary anymore, because the states do not cause any issues with one another, nor do the Indian tribes. Indian tribes have already integrated themselves within society. We don't have this problem anymore of Indian tribes not integrating themselves in with the actual societies, to where their businesses are not integrating themselves within the United States. And it was because they were once not using a common currency of the United States. So that's why we had a Department of Commerce, was to help this out. And this is basically what it was once necessary for. Now it's no longer necessary. And to make sure the states are dealing with one another equally, and not trying to put tariffs on one another. They're not doing that anymore. They've been constitutional. NASA is no longer functionable. It's not something that needs to exist. We have private industry that can easily fill that role. So what we see with this, and then obviously your other agencies like that are in science and such with it can easily be privately funded. And we only see the Department of Justice as the only thing that really needs funding out of this group. So you could essentially eliminate all of that. When we get down to to defense, which oversees funding for military, intelligence, community, and other national defense-related agencies, this is basically would be under one specific. Basically goes under one specific group, which is basically just Department of Defense, which we could pretty much eliminate the Army Corps of Engineers and let basically private groups handle their actual development of actual products, because we should be able to assume that they know how to actually engineer their actual things for the environment. We could easily eliminate that, because that's a complete waste of time and actually holding back a lot of projects, which would cut money out of the defense. So that's not necessary, because that's a non-necessary function. Number two is to cut military spending. We only want defense spending, and it could easily be done for about $250 billion, as we've discussed before. Energy and water development, we don't even need this. This again is what we call Army Corps of Engineers as well, under this as well. and that's the what it called that can completely be eliminated as well. That whole agency gone. Financial services in general, government, Department of Treasury, the executive office of the president, other government functions. You'd have to kind of oversee that and see what's oversees funding for each of those. You can limit limit a lot of the funding with it because it doesn't really they don't need as much funding as they would really see as fit, but it should basically be it should basically be the that will still actually exist with it. But what you need to understand is under that financial services, under that treasury with it, they should essentially be eliminating the IRS, because the IRS is a non-functional group. Because as we see with the way states run their taxation, they only run it directly going to the treasury. They do not run it going to an internal revenue service for the states. We got into Homeland Security. Now, Homeland Security essentially can be eliminated, and you can hand that over to the states for most of their functions. We can, you can get them basically down to basic functions with, when it comes down to, you can essentially, if you start working with immigration to eliminate when we start to go through this thing, you'll see with eliminating public aid. Once you eliminate public aid, this becomes completely null and void, because all you have to do for immigration would essentially be is provide your actual papers showing that you've passed a security check, some type of security check in your own home country. Because beyond that, nothing else would be necessary, because coming here would be at your own risk. Labor, health and human services and related agencies, this could essentially be completely eliminated, because all of the data from labor is completely illegitimate, and it's been proven to be illegitimate for well over 30 years. If we look at alternative numbers from these departments, we've seen that the Department of Labor has been completely politicized. Health and Human Services, this is going into a lot of the things for health coverage, and we can see that that's completely illegitimate. We see the Department of Education, we see that's completely not only not constitutional as a department, but it's not even useful. It's completely useless, because the actual education level has actually dropped immensely since this point. Legislative branch, basically they should go down to the basic functions, and don't need to essentially spend a lot of this excess money. Military, construction, veteran affairs, and related agencies. This might be something that if we start to, if we use this, we could actually, this would be for building building bases, military housing, veteran affairs, related agencies, is also related to military. This is military construction, including housing, the VA, and related agencies. Now we can get rid of the VA, let them be on the same health care coverage as the Senate and the House of Representatives is on. We can get rid of that and make it real easy for them, which allows a big savings of money. Because and we can essentially get rid of the VA, which is a huge boondoggle. When it comes to the other stuff with it, we would be essentially using the military construction, because you'd be shutting down, at least initially, it would be shutting down the idea of, if you want to go down to just defending the United States itself, you would have to you'd have to construct bases here at home in the United States and its territories, and to shut down the bases abroad. State foreign operations and related programs oversees the United States State Department, USAID, and related programs. Now, you would essentially have to shut down USAID. Now, this would essentially, you'd be making your statement on that, and and then U.S. State Department, you'd essentially be going with the with the State Department itself, its consulates within the United States, and then its embassies and consulates abroad. But you'd essentially stock it the way that we would any of our Social Security administrations, where it's very, very basic. Now, our problem is that we're not doing that. We're essentially trying to beautify these things, which is completely stupid. And we don't need to do that. People just want to do their business and get out. And these other related programs and USAID and all this other stuff is garbage. Transportation, HUD, and related agencies oversees the Department of Transportation, HUD, and related agencies. Completely garbage, because it's basically making it so we're sending too much money into Washington, and no state can actually handle their infrastructure. And then basically HUD is basically picking winners and losers on housing, and it's basically deciding on who gets their housing redone, who doesn't, and spending a lot of money for people who don't want to work to basically get free housing, and basically telling others to basically say they have to, who are working, they're paying the full price of their housing. And for pretty much with that whole system, that it needs to end when it comes to the way HUD is developed with it, and we need to basically create a system that's going to end it. And then special loan procedures with that need to end, because if we actually create programs that are actually from the actual banks to be beneficial for people, they can actually, just by the free market, it can actually work a lot better for individuals anyway. So what we're down to is basically the only things we'd actually keep as actual funding is the State Department only funding the actual State Department itself, plus the actual embassies and consulates. From military construction, VA, and related agencies, we're only going to do military construction and military housing, and it's only going to be for domestic purposes. The legislative branch, we're going to continue with that, and we're only going to basically keep it, we're going to keep it in a very simplistic manner. We're not going to keep this kind of insane type of function what they're currently doing. Labor, HHS, education related agencies, we're going to completely shut down. Interior, environment related agencies, that's EPA, U.S. Forest Service, and a number of independent agencies, we're basically going to hand that out to the states, totally shutting it down. Homeland Security, we're basically going to totally shut that down, hand that out to the states. Financial services and general government, we're basically going to let that continue, but we're basically going to eliminate the money for the IRS, because it's a duplicate agency and you don't need it. We're going to essentially eliminate a lot of the functions. Energy and water development, we're going to eliminate that. Defense, we're going to cut them down to only what they need. And it's only going to be it's only going to be for military defense, not civilian. Civilian's going to be completely eliminated, and you're going to find that with with the Justice Department as well. Justice Department, you're going to go through and you're going to eliminate the FBI, which is under them as well. That's under Commerce, Justice, Science, and related agencies. Basically, you're only going to keep the Justice Department in itself. Agricultural, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration related agencies, you're going to completely cut that out. And eventually what you're going to realize is that you don't need all these things, and the actual budget itself of the discretionary budget is going to be a fraction of what you see today. And you're going to see that when you start to see it, it's probably going to be closer to maybe $1 billion, $1.5 billion totally within the year. Or sorry, trillion, $1.5 trillion totally within a year at most. And that's going at highest. And that's assuming with the with the building of all of these bases within the United States. I mean that's even with building all the bases, even max 2 trillion, and that's going to be a far cry from what we're currently spending. And this is why when we're looking at what is necessary, it's going to be different. Now, what ends up now we'll talk. Now we need to also talk about what ends up getting added into the budget. Now, this is the other thing is when they say on that U.S. aid, oh, this is the only thing that goes toward foreign aid. That's not quite the truth. That's that's only what goes to foreign aid from U.S. aid. That's only a small fraction of what goes toward to U.S. to foreign aid. Because what ends up being the problem is the foreign aid goes from not only one of those appropriation bills, but we got to think that we have 12 appropriation bills. You have to understand that they'll tag it onto anything. You'll have APAC that will APAC loves their money. They'll tag it onto anything. It doesn't matter if it makes any sense. And the reason why we know this is because when we're talking about things that make sense with it, is we have the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is under Agricultural, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration, and related agencies. Since when does that actually make any sense for that to be under there? They actually have it under the agricultural part. That has nothing to do with agriculture. And that you can see is completely and utterly insane. And when we're looking at that should be understood. And that's why we get to these bloated budgets. And it's not just APAC. There's a bunch of other things. You'll have unions do the same thing. You'll have other countries try to advocate. You'll have you'll have CARE try to ask for the same amount of money as well. You'll have different groups try to get carve-outs from these things. You'll have different specialty groups ask for them. You'll have different companies try to get specialty contracts and specialty benefits of these crony capitalist corporate welfare from these different groups, and they'll try to tag it on no matter what the actual legitimate spending bill is. And it doesn't really matter what it is. They're still going to do it anyway. It doesn't matter if the actual thing makes any sense, because most often it doesn't make any sense. And that's the whole point. They go, okay, this doesn't make any sense, so we're just going to do it anyway. Now when we're talking about, we could be talking about anything, and basically is, frankly, when it comes down to government, we really do not need most of these functions. And that's the whole point, is government does not need to be overseeing all of these things from the federal level. These can be done at the local level, and people can actually rely on it from another point. Like, I mean, when it comes down to like labor, health, and human services, education-related agencies, nothing from this is actually functional. Health and human services, basically, that's basically Medicare, Medicaid. Basically, those two programs are completely broken, and you can get the same thing out of actually charity services, and many local areas and local businesses will do that. You in any free market system, you will actually have that anyway. Now, when we're talking about the education, when we were talking previously to the Department of Education put up with it, our education was actually rated a lot better. Since the Department of Education was created, our education has slipped. Department of Labor, if you've looked at our actual ratings for the actual labor statistics, since the Department of Labor actually came in existence, we've actually seen a huge discrepancy in the actual accurate numbers. And it's been basically politically motivated, because the party in charge is going to want to make sure that their numbers are looking a lot better, and that party in charge is going to be in charge of the Labor Department as well, because that's going to be an executive branch. And that's the whole problem that we see, and that's why we need that to go as well. Defense spending, I mean, defense spending is no longer defense. We also have civilian intelligence, which doesn't even serve an actual purpose. It's, in many cases, it's just basically larger boondoggle, because they don't actually have any legitimate intelligence. And all they're doing is they're just gathering data, which basically is no more than spying on people and violating the actual Constitution. And a lot of times they will essentially have policies that will advocate for regime change, which will essentially lead to the violation of the which will essentially lead to blowback, which is you're violating a country's sovereignty, and then eventually you create future problems which make things worse. Now, instead, we can actually be smart about this and eliminate those groups. Now, when we come to real solutions, you can see that we don't need all of that stuff. And they'll go, oh, but what about the allies? Well, the allies are going to essentially have their own defense. We don't need to supply that for them. Anybody who thinks any allies of ours are going to be disappointed for us only supplying for our own defense, I mean, if they were really allies to begin with, then they are not going to be disappointed one bit. They are going to understand that we need to supply for only our defense. We're not here to be basically an endless bank for the whole world and for these other countries. We're only here to supply for ourselves. If they were expecting us to basically supply for their defense, guess what? They weren't an ally to begin with. So when we start to look over all of these, you'll see that we could pretty much just start gutting each one of them, and eventually you'll realize we get to a fraction of the size, and it'll be a lot more functional of a government, and it'll work a lot better for everyone. And when you start to say, we'll replace welfare and different programs like that with private charity, it eliminates the actual incentive for people to cross the border for government welfare, which means all you need is basically a security check. You run the security check, you say, come right in. It's all you need. And when it comes to the other agencies, just start cutting out what you don't need. If it's something where all of its running is basically is propaganda for the actual party, eliminate it. It provides no actual real data, such as labor. The Department of Labor provides no actual data that's actually legitimate. Health and Human Services can be eliminated and provided with actual charity. The Department of Education can actually be eliminated and done locally. So that's a total bill that actually can be wiped out. Legislative branch can be cut down by stop these beautification processes. State Department can be actually trimmed out by cutting U.S. aid and cutting a lot of these other aid programs and stop all this waste. Transportation, HUD, and related agencies can be completely eliminated. Homeland Security can be eliminated and set down to being local areas, and just basically making setting that out to the State Department and letting the levels basically run as long as a person passes basically giving them a visitor's visa or whatever visa they require, to be based upon what do you call it, security check, and as long as they pass that, they're good. And most countries have their own security check system, equal to what we would call like an FBI. Agricultural, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration related agencies can be completely eliminated. As we've seen basically most of these can be eliminated, so it would essentially reduce down the budget. And our biggest problem right now is just overspending, and it's causing problems with the actual economy. Now, we don't want the actual government to be an actual force of what we do in our daily lives. We don't want to essentially notice the government. The government should have no impact. If the government shuts down, we shouldn't notice. If the government's still open, we shouldn't notice. We should just go on with our daily lives. That's the whole point. So what needs to happen is we need a government that's a lot smaller, that has no impact on our lives with their decisions. And this is the whole point. Their decisions should be minute at best. And when their decisions are becoming more and more impactful, this means the government is way too large. Thus, that means we need to start reducing down their actual size. That's why we see that with these appropriation bills that they have way too much power, and a lot more than the original founders intended. That's why we need to essentially cut these down and have some of the people start cutting a lot of the abilities of these things that are in it out of the actual spending, or at least actually appropriate the 12 bills to begin with, instead of these just huge omnibus bills that we've been doing, because we have not done this in several years. I mean, I forgot when the last one we actually did. I think the last one we actually did was several years ago, and that was when we actually the last one was where we actually had a surplus on the economy. Was the last time we actually had the bills appropriated, and that's pathetic. Now, if you like this, like, subscribe, click the notification bell, make sure that you share it all the way around. Check out my Patreon page and share it all the way around. Share that all the way around. I know it's a little bit short, but it's just the way things go. Because this one was not going to be, as I said, as long as some of the other ones, but that's kind of it with it. And bye, everyone.